In the second part of the thrilling story, Unmasking the Perfect Crime, the rise and fall of the Brink's robbers, we continue to delve into the minds of the criminals and uncover chilling new details about the crime that shook the world. How did they manage to plan and coordinate with such precision? What steps led them to their brief moment of glory? And what mistakes led to their dramatic downfall? Prepare to dive into complex details, where threads intertwine and secrets reveal the greatest heist in modern history, a story that unveils the dark side of the human mind and its wild desires. If you enjoyed the story and want more exciting content, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to stay updated. O'Keefe paid his respects to other members of the Brink's gang in Boston on several occasions in the spring of 1954, making it evident to investigators that he was attempting to seek money. He was both lenient and insistent in his dealings with his conspirators to the extent that agents hoped he might try to acquire a large sum of money, perhaps his share of the Brink's loot. During these weeks, O'Keefe renewed his relationship with a Boston swindler who had actively sought funds for O'Keefe and Shore's defense in 1950. The criminal underworld soon sounded an alarm about this pair. It was reported that on May 18, 1954, O'Keefe and his swindler partner took Vincent Costa to a hotel room and held him for ransom amounting to several $1,000s. Allegedly, other members of the Brink's gang arranged to pay a small part of the ransom requested by O'Keefe, and Costa was released on May 20, 1954. Later, private agencies interrogated Costa and his wife, Pino and his wife, the swindler, and O'Keefe. All denied any knowledge of the alleged incident. Nevertheless, many members of the Brink's gang appeared visibly uneasy and seemed unusually concerned during the latter half of May and early June 1954. Within 2 weeks, the relative calm shifted when an assassination attempt was made on O'Keefe on June 5, 1954. Reports circulated in Boston's criminal world that a car approached O'Keefe's vehicle in Dorchester, Massachusetts, in the early hours of June 5. Sensing something amiss, O'Keefe ducked in the front seat of his car as the would-be assassins fired bullets that pierced his windshield. A second shooting incident occurred on the morning of June 14, 1954, in Dorchester, Massachusetts, when O'Keefe and his swindler friend visited Baker. By then, Baker was in a state of nervous collapse. Allegedly, he pulled a gun on O'Keefe. The two men exchanged several shots, but none hit their targets. Baker fled, and the brief meeting ended. A third assassination attempt on O'Keefe took place on June 16, 1954. This incident also occurred in Dorchester and involved the firing of over 30 bullets. O'Keefe sustained injuries to his wrist and chest but once again managed to escape with his life. Police investigating the scene found a large amount of blood, a man's broken wristwatch, and a .45 caliber gun. 5 stray bullets were found embedded in a nearby building. On June 17, 1954, Boston police arrested Elmer Trigger Burke and charged him with possession of a machine gun. It was later determined that this machine gun had been used in the attempted assassination of O'Keefe. Burke, a hired killer, was allegedly employed by associates of O'Keefe to eliminate him. Following his injuries on June 16, O'Keefe disappeared. On August 1, 1954, he was captured in Leicester, Massachusetts, and handed over to Boston police, who held him for parole violation due to weapon possession. On August 5, 1954, O'Keefe was sentenced to 27 months in prison. For safety reasons, he was confined in the Hampton County Jail in Springfield, Massachusetts, rather than the Suffolk County Jail in Boston. O'Keefe's swindler partner, who had allegedly assisted him in holding Costa hostage and was present during the shootout between O'Keefe and Baker, vanished on August 3, 1954. The missing swindler's car was found near his home, however, his whereabouts remain a mystery. Boston's criminal figures generally assumed that the swindler was killed because of his association with O'Keefe. Other members of the robbery gang were also facing their troubles. James Ignatius Faherty, a specialist in armed robbery, had been mentioned in criminal world conversations in January 1950 about a deal in which gang members used binoculars to watch their intended victims counting large sums of money. Faherty was questioned on the night of the robbery. He claimed he had been drinking in various bars from about 5:10 p.m. until 7:45 p.m. Some witnesses claimed to have seen him. However, continued investigations linked him to the gang. In 1936 and 1937, Faherty was convicted of armed robbery violations. He was released on bail in the fall of 1944 and remained on bail until March 1954 when he faced a predicament. Due to unsatisfactory conduct, drunkenness, refusal to seek work, and association with known criminals, his bail was revoked, and he returned to the Massachusetts State Prison. However, he was released again after 7 months. Each of the 5 lock cylinders was taken on separate occasions. Removing the lock cylinder from the outer door posed the greatest risk of detection, as passers-by might notice its absence. Thus, a substitute lock cylinder was installed until the original cylinder could be replaced. Inside the building, gang members carefully studied all available information about Brink schedules and shipments. Their surveillance was so precise that the criminals could deduce the type of activity occurring in Brink's offices by observing the building's lights, and they knew the number of personnel working at different hours of the day. A few months before the heist, O'Keefe and Gusiora covertly entered a security alarm company in Boston and obtained a copy of Brink's building's protective plans. After reviewing and finding the plans unhelpful, O'Keefe and Gusiora returned them in the same manner. McGinnis had previously discussed sending a man to the U.S. Patent Office in Washington, D.C., to examine patents related to the alarm devices used in the Brink's building. A great deal of thought was given to every detail. When the thieves decided they needed a truck, they opted to steal a new one, as a used truck might contain identifiable marks and might not be in optimal operating condition. Shortly afterward, during the first week of November, a green 1949 Ford truck was reported missing by a car dealer in Boston. In November and December 1949, practice runs were made to approach Brink's building and navigate the escape route to perfection. The month before January 17, 1950, saw about 6 mock entries into Brink's, none of which materialized as the gang did not consider the conditions favorable. During this, Costa, equipped with a flashlight to signal the other men, was stationed on the roof of a residential building on Prince Street overlooking Brink's. From this vantage point, Costa could assess whether conditions inside the building were optimal for the thieves better than the men below. The final rehearsal took place on January 16, 1950, the night before the robbery. At around 7 p.m. on January 17, 1950, the gang members gathered in the Roxbury area of Boston and entered the back of the Ford truck. Banfield, the driver, was alone in the front. In the back were Pino, O'Keefe, Baker, Faherty, Maffey, Gusiora, Michael Vincent Jagan, the photographer, and Thomas Francis Richardson. Jagan and Richardson, identified as associates of other gang members, were among the first suspects. During the trip from Roxbury, Pino distributed navy coats and chauffeur caps to the 7 other men in the truck's rear. Each man was also equipped with a gun, a Halloween mask, and a pair of gloves. O'Keefe wore rubber-soled shoes to muffle his steps, while the others wore rubber boots. As the truck passed Brink's offices, the thieves noticed that the lights were off on the Prince Street side of the building, which worked to their advantage. After continuing down the street to the end of the playground adjacent to Brink's building, the truck stopped. All except Pino and Banfield got out and headed to the playground, awaiting Costa's signal. Costa, who was in his lookout position, had arrived earlier in a Ford stolen by the gang from behind Boston Symphony Hall 2 days prior. Upon receiving the go signal from Costa, the 7 armed men moved towards the Prince Street entrance of Brink's building. Using the outer door key they had obtained earlier, the men swiftly entered and donned their masks. The other keys in their possession allowed them to access the second floor, where they surprised 5 Brink's employees. With the employees securely bound and gagged, the thieves began looting. During this process, one employee's glasses were inadvertently gathered with other items and stuffed into the loot bag. When the bag was emptied later that night, the gang discovered the glasses and destroyed them. The meticulously planned routine within Brink's was only interrupted when the employee in the adjacent Brink's garage triggered an alarm. Before the thieves could apprehend the employee, he moved away from the area. Although the employee did not suspect a robbery was occurring, this incident prompted the criminals to hasten their actions. Before fleeing with the loot bags, the 7 armed men attempted to open a metal box containing General Electric's payroll. However, they had brought no tools with them and were unsuccessful. Upon departure, the gang loaded the loot into the truck parked on Prince Street near the door. As the truck sped away with 9 gang members, with Costa leaving in the stolen Ford, Brink's employees worked to free themselves and reported the crime. Banfield drove the truck to Maffey's parents' home in Roxbury. The loot was quickly unloaded, and Banfield set out to hide the truck. Jagan, who was on parole at the time, left the truck before it reached the Roxbury home where the loot was unloaded. Knowing he would be a prime suspect, he wanted to begin establishing an alibi immediately. While the others remained in the house to make a quick inventory of the loot, Pino and Faherty left. About an hour and a half later, Banfield returned with McGinnis. Until this time, McGinnis had been in his liquor store and was not with the gang during the robbery. The gang members who stayed at Maffey's parents' house soon dispersed to establish alibis for themselves. However, before leaving, About $380,000 was placed in a coal bin and removed by Baker for security reasons. Pino, Richardson, and Costa each took $20,000, which was recorded on a paper. Before removing the remaining loot from the house on January 18, 1950, the gang members attempted to identify incriminating items. They went to great lengths to erase pencil marks and other notes on the bills that the criminals believed might be traceable to Brinks. They even feared that the new banknotes might be linked to the crime, prompting McGinnis to suggest a plan to pass the new money quickly. On the night of January 18, 1950, O'Keefe and Gucciora each received $100,000 from the stolen loot. They placed the total amount of $200,000 in the trunk of O'Keefe's car. O'Keefe then left his car, and the $200,000, at a garage on Blue Hill Avenue in Boston. In the period immediately following the Brinks heist, pressure was directed at O'Keefe and Gucciora. So, when they were arrested by government authorities in late January 1950, O'Keefe informed McGinnis to retrieve his car and the money it contained. A few weeks later, O'Keefe recovered his share of the loot, given to him in a bag that had been transferred to his car from one driven by McGinnis and Banfield. Later, when he counted the money, he found the bag contained $98,000, $2,000 short. Upon examining the bill, a Federal Reserve note, the officer noticed it was damp. The arcade operator informed the officer that he had followed the man who passed this bill to a nearby bar. This man, later identified as a minor figure in Boston's underworld, was located and questioned. As the officer and arcade operator spoke with him, two other Baltimore police officers observed the proceedings. One of these officers quickly grabbed the criminal's hand, from which a large roll of money fell. The criminal was taken to the police station, where a search revealed he was carrying over $1,000, including $860 in old and worn bills. A Secret Service agent, summoned by the Baltimore officers, arrived during the interrogation at the station. After examining the money, the agent confirmed it was not counterfeit. The suspect told the officers he had found this money, claiming there was a large roll of bills in his hotel room, which he claimed to have also found. He explained that he was working in construction in Boston and, in late March or early April 1956, had discovered a plastic bag containing the money while working on a house foundation. A search of his room at a Baltimore hotel yielded $3,780, which was brought to the police station. At approximately 9:50 p.m., the Baltimore FBI office was informed of the incident's details, and serial numbers from several bills were provided. These were cross-referenced with serial numbers of bills known to be part of the Brinks loot. Of the $4,822 found on the minor criminal, FBI agents identified $4,635 as money taken by the Brinks robbers. Interviews conducted with him on June 3 and 4, 1956, revealed that the 31-year-old had a record of arrests and convictions dating back to his teens and had been paroled from a federal prison camp less than a year prior, after serving over 2 years of a 3-year sentence for transporting counterfeit securities across states. At the time of his arrest, he also faced a pending armed robbery charge in Massachusetts. During his FBI interrogation, the money handler stated that he had worked as a building contractor with another man on Tremont Street in Boston. He mentioned that he and his partner shared office space with someone he only knew as Fat John. According to the suspect, on the night of June 1, 1956, Fat John asked him to remove a panel from a section of wall in the office, and when the panel was removed, Fat John declared that each bundle contained $5,000. According to the criminal arrested in Baltimore, Fat John later told him that the money was part of the Brinks loot and offered him $5,000 to pass $30,000 worth of bills. The suspect informed Baltimore FBI agents that he accepted 6 bundles of money from Fat John. The next day, June 2, 1956, he left Massachusetts with $4,750 of these bills and began passing them. He arrived in Baltimore on the morning of June 3 and was arrested by Baltimore police that evening. The Boston FBI office was immediately provided with full details of this significant development. Both Fat John and the business associate of the man arrested in Baltimore were located and questioned on the morning of June 4, 1956. Both denied knowledge of the recovered loot. That afternoon, after admitting that Fat John had retrieved the money and described it as proceeds from the Brinks robbery, a search warrant was executed at the Tremont Street offices in Boston occupied by the 3 men. The partition wall described by the suspect was located in Fat John's office, and when the wall was removed, a picnic cooler was found. This cooler contained over $57,700, including $51,906 that could be identified as part of the Brinks loot. The discovery of this money at the Tremont Street offices led to the arrests of both Fat John and the business associate of the Baltimore suspect. Both men remained silent after their arrests. On June 5 and 7, a Suffolk County grand jury re-indicted the three men, charging them with multiple crimes related to possessing funds obtained in the Brinks robbery. After pleading guilty in November 1956, Fat John received a 2-year prison sentence, while the other two men received 1-year sentences. After serving his sentence, Fat John resumed his criminal life. On June 19, 1958, while free on appeal from a 5-year narcotics sentence, he was found shot dead in a car that had crashed into a truck in Boston. The money inside the cooler, hidden in the wall of the Tremont Street office, was wrapped in plastic and newspapers. 3 newspapers used in wrapping the bills were identified, all published in Boston between December 4, 1955, and February 21, 1956. The FBI was also able to identify the carpenter who remodeled the offices that concealed the loot. His records showed he worked on the offices in early April 1956, following instructions from Fat John. The loot could not have been hidden behind the panel before that time. Due to the currency's varying states of decay, counting it accurately was challenging. Some bills were torn, and others disintegrated upon handling. Later examinations by the FBI laboratory revealed that the decomposition, discoloration, and clumping together of the bills were partly due to the fact that all the bills had been wet. It was conclusively determined that the currency bundles had been damaged before being wrapped in newspaper pieces, with indications that the bills had previously been inside a canvas bag buried in soil composed of sand and ash. Additionally, traces of mold and insect remains were found on the loot. Even with this money recovered in Baltimore and Boston, over $1,150,000 of currency taken in the Brinks heist remained unaccounted for. The recovery of part of the loot was a severe blow to the gang members who were still awaiting trial in Boston. Had any particles of evidence been found in the loot that could directly link them to it? This question weighed heavily on their minds. In July 1956, further significant developments occurred. Stanley Gucciora was transferred to Massachusetts from Pennsylvania to face court and was placed under medical care due to weakness, dizziness, and vomiting. On the afternoon of July 9, a priest visited him. During the visit, Gucciora got out of bed, collapsed, and hit his head. He died 2 hours later. Examinations revealed that the cause of death was a brain tumor and severe cerebral edema. O'Keefe and Gucciora had been close friends for many years. When O'Keefe confessed his role in the Brinks robbery to FBI agents in January 1956, he spoke of his deep respect for Gucciora. As a government witness, he would reluctantly testify against him. Now, Gucciora had passed beyond human authority, and O'Keefe was more determined to see that justice was served. With Gucciora's death, only 8 members of the Brinks gang remained to stand trial. On January 18, 1956, O'Keefe had pleaded guilty to the Brinks armed robbery. The trial of these 8 men began on the morning of August 6, 1956, before Judge Felix Forte in Suffolk County Court, Boston. The defense immediately filed motions that would delay or prevent the trial. All motions were denied, and jury selection began on August 7. More than 100 people testified as witnesses for both the prosecution and defense during September 1956. Among the most critical witnesses was Specs O'Keefe, who meticulously reviewed the crime's details, outlining the role of each of the 8 defendants. On October 9, 1956, Judge Forte sentenced the 8 men. Pino, Costa, Maffei, Jagan, Faherty, Richardson, and Baker received life sentences for robbery, along with 2-year conspiracy to rob sentences, and terms ranging from 8 to 10 years for breaking and entering at night. Although McGinnis was not present at the crime scene on the night of the robbery, he received a life sentence on each of the 8 counts for which he was charged as an accessory before the fact concerning the Brinks robbery. Additionally, McGinnis received other sentences of 2 years, 2.5 to 3 years, and 8 to 10 years. While appeals were being pursued on their behalf, the 8 men were transferred to the state prison in Walpole, Massachusetts. From their prison cells, they closely followed the legal maneuvers aimed at securing their freedom. In the end, the perfect crime had a fitting conclusion, for everyone except the robbers.